Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another show of the Author's Dilemma. It is Thursday evening, 6:30 Central, live for those that are with us. And if you're listening to us in the car, well, it's whatever time that you're listening to us in the car. It is our 21st show. Our show is old enough to drink, if it did.
I knew that joke was coming. The moment you
Yeah.
said 21, I said
But
Josh is going to make that joke.
Wow.
The Author's Dilemma and, dad jokes. But anyway,
Yes.
so I am J.E. Jack, and I write horror, urban fantasy, and paranormal thrillers.
And I am Hyrum Hawks, and I write sci-fi, hard sci-fi, and sci-fantasy.
And I'm Jennifer Carr, and I write Christian fiction and clean contemporary romance.
And we want to welcome you this evening. So, by the way, what is going on in our business? That's the next part of our show, our business. Hiram, what's going on with you?
Well, I've settled into my new job, and I finally had some time to write.
Mm-hmm.
And using a life experience from last week involving skunks that we trapped in our yard, I came up with a story that I'm really having fun. It's my first middle grade story.
Oh, cool.
The previous youngest was a YA, and I haven't finished that. I'm working on it. But this middle grade is the snarkiest thing I've ever written, and I'm having fun. And so it's like getting back into writing, and I think I've written 8,000 words. So, yes, that is, things are happening, and I'm almost done reviewing. Well, I guess I'm almost halfway through reviewing The Persian Asteroid, my first book's audiobook. The reader is awesome. It's going to be so fun when I can release it.
That's exciting.
That's
well,
awesome.
I was all excited about starting up my writing again and getting almost 2,000 words on the page yesterday. So
That's any amount going is good.
You're right. No, you're right. No, because it was literally, it told me, I showed y'all, it had been 30 days with 0 words. And so the fact that I got almost 2,000 in a single day, I felt pretty good about it. But I'm not surprised because I don't podcast and write usually at the same time. It's too difficult to go back and forth between creative and logistical. So I just don't. But that being said, I did launch my Kickstarter to crowdfund some audiobooks. And I think we're already 8% there. So yay.
And you need to put your link in the comments.
Okay, I'll see if I can do
Self-promotion
that.
is acceptable.
Yes, at some point. Yes. Click, 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 as she types. Click, 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 click.
Yeah, let me do that real quick while I'm
Oh.
thinking about it.
Yeah. So, in my world, this past week I took a week off from my day job, and man, it has been eye-opening to see the difference between having no bandwidth to having plenty of bandwidth because I can actually think, and that's been really pleasant. Yesterday I did write so I went on a trip this past weekend, and I wrote like a travelogue / commentary about that trip, and it was a good trip. I went to Southern Illinois to visit family, and I wrote like 3,500 words, 3,700 words yesterday, and it was such a treat because after listening to Dan Kenner last week, which by the way, if you missed that episode, be sure to go check that out, and listening to the way that's another cool thing about the show is coming across different types or different people and how they do things, and it's just like it's kind of like a guiding light, and it's like, oh well, if they can do it, well, let me try that. And of course, writing a travelogue or writing a memoirish type of story is always, for me, it's easier because it just happened, right? Like this happened, this is my thoughts on it. So I did that, and that was good. The book on tape, or book on tape, boy, show my age.
We are
Audible.
old.
Yeah, Audible. My book. I still need to go through that, and that's an ongoing slog. Yeah, but going back to what you're saying, and that's pretty much all that's going on in my world right now, is just basically, I've now come to the realization that I have got to figure out a way to, like, I like my job, I do, but I got to figure out a way to create more space in order to be able to think more. So I don't know what that means yet, but I have to figure out. But going back to what you were saying earlier, Jen, about going 30 days without writing is, I find that the longer I go without writing, the harder it is to start again.
Yes.
And it's kind of like water retention, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like the surface level of the water, the farther you are away from it, the harder it becomes. And that's kind of like writing too. The farther I am away from writing every day, it hurts when I smack that water.
Jeez.
You know?
Yes. But then you get into it and you're like,
Right.
oh my gosh, I forgot how wonderful this was.
Oh, exactly. Right. I mean, it's a love-hate relationship. I mean,
Yes.
every time you sit in the seat, it's like the hot seat and you don't want to do it, but you do. And
Yes.
that's what I found yesterday as well, because it's been quite a while since I wrote anything really creative. So any newsworthy items this week?
So there's something funny. Now, we're going to avoid politics, but satire is not politics. Satire is writing. And so The Onion's headline today is amazing satire. I don't care if you like Biden or Trump. Really don't care. The headline is Trump executed. That
Oh my gosh.
is brilliant satire. He didn't get executed, of course. This is The Onion. It's a satirical newspaper. Writing satire is an art. And so I would say in writing news, The Onion won today. That was a great headline. I don't have any other news this week, but that's I love satire. If you can write satire, please, and if you're a good satirist, we'd love to talk to you, because that's an art.
The truth. Yeah.
Oh, we should just go to Babylon Bee and ask them to come join us, because
Love Babylon Bee.
they consistently do it very
Yes.
well.
My favorite headline that they had was Babylon Bee shutting down because we can no longer predict things. Everything keeps actually happening.
It's kind of like conspiracy theory, right? I mean, what's the difference between a conspiracy theorist and fact? Is what, 3 months?
A few years.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Not long.
But that is a show for another podcast.
And that's a good segue into research.
That's right.
I like
Which
it.
is the topic of our show tonight. Research. How important it is to the work and the writing that you do. I think sometimes, especially as creatives, granted, I think for some people it might fall by the wayside, but it is so important, I think, because as a reader, I have read so many books, and if I come across something that's not right, then that makes me very suspect for the rest of the book I'm reading. And then I find myself looking for facts for the rest of the book. So it almost takes me out of the book so bad. So how do you guys research, and what are your thoughts on it?
So, as a scientist, I've been researching most of my life. I actually, before I say what I do, I see 3 types of research. There's front end, during, and after. You can fix it in post. So a lot of people, when they write, don't do the research ahead. They just write it, and then they find out what they did wrong and fix it.
Weirdos.
Some people write, then Google, find out the thing, and then write more. Those are the people that spend 3 hours figuring out what kind of carriage. That's a Jen thing. What kind of carriage it is. What's the name of the carriage in your historical romance? Then there's the front end researchers. They're the ones who either did it for a living, and so they just know it already, or they've figured out what they want to write about, and so they've researched the entire subject and become an expert at it. I am a bit of the before and the during. I almost never do the after. So I don't do much before anyway, but I spent 40 years doing it. So when it comes to sci-fi, I pretty much already know, and I'll keep up with the news. So that I did it beforehand. I didn't know I was going to be an author, and so the 40 years of research just came in handy. But I am also
Amazing.
like Jen. I'm one of those who, as I write, and I think, ooh, I wonder if ferrets do this. I then Google it, find out, yeah, that's my first book. Still got to rewrite and publish that. And you find out, yes, ferrets do like eating certain foods, and they don't like others. And that's a dangerous type of research, though, because sometimes you stop writing because you're going down the rabbit hole for so long.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I have come to... I do that too, right? So when I'm writing my book, I'll throw in a fact, and then I'm like, because in my second novel, there was certain soda drinks, or pop or Coke or whatever, that came out at different times. So I would, in the mid '90s, I had to make sure that this particular item was actually around during that time, because that's important. Yeah. Twice the caffeine and all the sugar. Man, I'm drinking a few of those in my time. But it's true.
Probably gave us cancer.
Yeah, probably did.
Probably.
Life gives you
No.
cancer.
Yeah, I'm
Life.
the same way. Like, I will jump right in and I will be like, I have to know exactly. Because especially with my current series, it's all like 90s country based. So I have to make sure that they're lining up with, was this person actually a country artist in the 90s or were they 2000s? And so then I just get lost in listening to music and making playlists. And the next thing you know, I'm like, oh crap, I have a book over here I got to get back to.
It's funny. I'm reading a book now. I think the guy's name's Robert McClanman. I'm probably butchering his name, and I'm sorry. But anyway, he talks about this '64 Mustang, and it's in the year is 1964. That's the year that the book is set in. And I misread how old the kid was, and immediately I was like, oh, he's wrong, because I thought it was like in the 50s or something. Because I know a little bit about Mustangs, not because my dad, he was really into Mustangs, and it was just so funny. And it kind of goes, like I said, it kind of goes back into that whole point of make sure whatever you write, make sure there's a little bit of fact that backs up to it, because you're going to have someone reading your stuff and it's like, that's not right. Uh-oh.
I agree. 90s country is where it's at.
Justin Barber says 90s countries is great. So is 64 Mustangs. And he is absolutely correct. Although I am particular to 69 Mustangs myself, but that's just me.
So I'm writing an entire series right now that centers on a 90s country reality television singing competition. So
achy breaky heart.
Was there any reality shows in the 90s? That is
American Idol started.
Wait, no,
did it start that long ago?
Wait, reality
Didn't
shows?
it? Late
Reality
90s,
shows.
wasn't
I mean,
it?
reality shows. They had the Real World.
Oh yeah.
I never saw that.
Cribs. Oh yeah.
Okay, so maybe it did exist.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not saying it was good TV. I'm just saying it.
Right. I'm not. No. But as far as like competitions, they were kind of like Survivor's been around for a long time. I don't remember
don't know.
exactly.
I
That
don't
was
remember.
2000.
I think that came out in
late
2000.
90s. So yeah, and even if it was
Gladiator.
Ooh, gladiators.
American
Yes.
Gladiator. Wait,
American Gladiator.
Yes.
That was sort of competition.
It was. I always wanted to be on that show. Was
Me
that
and my
terrible?
sisters watched that religiously.
Love that
man.
show. Man, the 90s were where it's at too, just in general.
The
It was
90s
a
was
great decade.
No,
It was fantastic.
we're living in psychotic times, but that's again.
That's the other dilemma
At
podcast.
least we weren't the 70s with brown and gold for everything.
And
Sorry,
green.
I could go off on that.
Yeah.
Hey, I
Yes,
like,
and green.
yeah. So anyway,
Okay,
coming
so
back
when
to
you're
our
doing research,
Just
yes, I have
research
a
the
question
90s.
for you.
Right.
Have you ever tried to stop yourself and force yourself to be a post researcher? I've tried it with one trick. If I don't know it, I put square brackets around it, write what I need, and then leave it. And because I put square brackets around it, I am now emotionally capable of letting it go because I know I will fix it in post.
Lucky.
I don't do that with research, but I do it with if I forget someone's name. And I don't want to scroll to the beginning of the book to be like, who was this person? Because that happens.
That's fair.
But no, I do like your idea, and then highlighting it or figuring it out in such a way so that when I go back through the manuscript. But then my editor, my wife, she makes sure that I know I'm so very fortunate, but she makes sure that everything jives as well. So yes, I do a little bit of here's the thing. Here's the thing with certain research, right? Sometimes you'll want to pre-research a book or the story that you want to write, and then you'll start researching and realize, oh my gosh, this is so much bigger than I imagined. And so then it kind of stops you, because that's the problem I'm having now. Because I was thinking about writing a prequel to my urban fantasy and set that in World War I. Well, I don't know much about World War I. I know that it happened. I know that certain key events about it. So I bought a book because I'm like, let me try to expand my mind a little bit to kind of prepare for that. I cannot write that book right now. I mean, I could, but I don't think it would be as well. I mean, maybe eventually once my writing is a little bit better. And that's another thing when it comes to research and writing too. Sometimes that will happen. Sometimes you will come across an idea or a thought that you will want to write about, but you know that your writing isn't good enough yet. And that's okay. That's why you keep on writing other stuff until you get to the point where you're like, you know what? Now is the time I can do this. Just my experience. What are your thoughts?
I also think that reading a lot
Hmm.
of things that are like what you want to write will
Oh,
help
yeah.
intensely. Like it will make a big difference because you don't want to copy somebody else's work, but you will see how it's done, and you can kind of get a feel for that could fit my style, that won't fit my style, that kind of thing. So that helps me.
It's interesting. I'm sorry, Hiram.
No, go ahead.
Okay. It has nothing to do with research, but it does have something to do about copying other people's work. And I know this sounds kind of weird at first. Now, you would never publish this, but I heard back in the day before internet, before, like 100 years ago, people would actually copy word for word the authors that they loved in order to really understand how they came across, the different ideas or
Artists,
yeah. And it was
artists
just
do that too.
well, exactly. The same thing happens in painting too. I mean, people are always recreating the old masters painting to get better with their own technique because when they fully something happens in the brain when you're actually copying someone else because then you can see how they thought at that time. And it was just a really thought-provoking thing, which I actually kind of did that with Stephen King a little bit. His I copied a couple of his chapters just because I had free time, and I'm like, oh, let me see how. And it was truly interesting. And honestly, I think it kind of helped me as a writer too, just with some of the grammar, some of the way he writes certain things. I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway,
No, I like that.
just a thought.
Yeah, I actually been researching to an extent like how to write comedy by listening to a book series. It's called The Expeditionary Force by Craig Allenson. And I've just been listening to the snarky way that it's narrated, the snarky characters in it. And that's actually research isn't all just looking back at historical documents and figuring out how to write a historical fiction. Getting the right tone to a story can involve some research, getting the right feel for the world, but also getting the physics right, especially if you're in sci-fi or even in fantasy. You got to know how things work, because like writing sci-fi, if you don't have an understanding of physics, you're gonna get caught pretty quick. And so that's again where pre-study helps. Well, that's why if you ever
Yes.
write sci-fi, it's because we're doing a co-authoring thing.
That's right.
I'm taking care of the
That's exactly
sci-fi.
right.
And you're
Yes,
taking
I'm going to
care of
mix
the
this
romance.
color green with this color blue, and I'm going to get red. Like,
It works. No.
wait, that's not right.
Use your imagination, Josh.
Fiction.
Right. But no,
In my
seriously,
world, it does.
I smell the color 9. Just saying.
There you go.
Often, anyway. But that is true. It will pull somebody out of the story, especially if they have some connection to whatever it is you're writing. Like physics wouldn't faze me, but also don't make it too complicated. Don't do too much research and go into too much detail because I'll be
That's
like,
right.
and shut it off. Like I'm done there. I did that with my dad. He's former law enforcement. And now he's the chaplain for their local police department. And so he does ride-alongs and all this good stuff. And so he's still kind of in there. And in my second book, The Lost and Found, the main character, he's a sheriff. And I was like, all right, somebody's being held at knife point and the sheriff is coming in the back door. How is this going to go down? I'm like, Dad. And so he was like, okay, this is how this would look. So, find people who do know what it looks like, who can tell you more reality instead of just having to
shoot
read
'em.
online.
I
I mean,
did this-
there's that.
Somebody's been in law enforcement too long. No, see, in the Valley of Death, I have a surgery scene where the main character has to save his fellow another character. I don't want to give anything away, but he has to do a surgery, and so I called my brother-in-law, who is a doctor, and I said, I'm doing a surgery in this book, and I need to know what would happen if you had this magic. And I explained the magic, and he took me through it. It was great. His imagination's such that I was able to, okay, so you use this glyph to go here, and then you can use that to initiate this and pull this, and it made for a pretty riveting scene, in my opinion, and it was probably fairly accurate. I mean,
Nice.
probably some surgeon could have been like, no, that wouldn't react that way. Well, and I'd say, well, magic, shut up.
Magic, yeah.
Magic cures a lot.
Indeed.
Yeah. So when it came to my fourth book, and that's another thing. I mean, that's a wonderful thing about technology these days is, or people that too. And like, I don't know a first thing about circuses and traveling carnivals, but there's someone on my Facebook friend list that has actually runs one. So I reached out to her and she kind of gave me a lot of resources. And then I read some different books and different like, and so it gave me enough to go on. And then I wrote a whole book about it.
That's
And I
awesome.
got some other ideas because I just went to Southern Illinois. So eventually
What
I'll
does
write
that
those
have
books
to
as
do
well.
with circuses? Oh wait,
What? Well,
That's his setting, go-to
it's
setting.
in my brain. Yeah. No, Southern Illinois is my place. It's kind of like, Maine for Stephen King. Something about that place just always, I don't know, intrigues me, I guess.
Yeah.
anywhere
Well, there's
that
a connection
cold
to
and
it.
that dark is probably horror.
That's true. That's true.
Oh.
But so
To any of our main listeners, I love you. I'm joking.
That's right.
yeah. Well, it's funny. My brain works in puns. So when you said Maine, and I'm like, our main character.
That's what I was like, our main
I was like,
characters?
our main characters, or our main, whatever, not characters,
That's
but main.
great. I
People that love
also,
us.
so in my first book, no matter what, they take a tour of the Washington Cathedral in DC. I've never been, so I took a virtual tour of the cathedral, and I was like, now I kind of want to go visit. But it was very cool because there are these virtual resources that you could just sit there and be like, oh, okay, so this is what they would see, this is what it would sound like, because it's it's a big old cavernous place and that kind of thing. So anyway, I just thought that's also a way you can do research as well.
And that's true. And you can write it off if you have a business. Sort of.
I like it.
So one
least
thing
that's what
that
I
I
hear,
think
I
this
don't
all
know.
leads to, if we utilize all the resources available, in this day and age, of course, with the internet, my wife is a Gen Xer and she's a bit older than me, and she will still tell me how, yes, I looked things up in a card catalog, and I'm like, yeah, you're old.
The Dewey Decimal
So did
System.
I, but not very long.
Right.
Because that transition away from card catalog to digital databases was basically overnight for most of us. It's all there, but sometimes the books you need to find them in the library. So getting to know a library, if you have a university, you can find really old books and find some really cool stuff. But you also want to, there's some core things. Your industry, or sorry, your genre might have some research you've got to do if you want to write in it. So for example, if I asked the Regency romance authors group on Facebook, what do I need to know in order to write an effective Regency sci-fi romance? They're like, well, and then they gave me a list of books, one of them being the Time Traveler's Guide to Regency England. And I've read a lot of it, and it's weird. Oh my gosh, Regency England was psychotic. I mean, it's all romanticized, but in reality, it was a pretty weird place.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're writing historical fiction, if you haven't read Guns, Germs, and Steel, you're way out of line. You got to read that before you write anything else. That was one of the most life-changing books for me ever. Just learning what that meant for history changed my entire perspective on the world.
That's awesome.
You got to find those pivotal books, the pivotal videos, whatever it is that you need in order to gain the perspective your genre has. Because right now, if you're writing historical fiction and you don't know Guns, Germs, and Steel, you're probably leaving a lot on the table and might not get a good reception, because if you don't know germ theory when it comes to historical things, well, that's a huge part of anything,
That's so true.
as one example.
By the way, Justin Barber says Gen X rules. Since he went to high school
I am
with me, he's
as
a
close
Gen
to
Xer
Gen
as well.
X.
Yeah, which if you follow, if you see any of the videos on TikTok or Instagram, apparently you do not want to awaken the Gen Xer.
That's what I've heard.
No, when my
It's-
wife gets
It's a
mad,
sleeping dragon.
nations fall.
Yeah. Some of us are geriatric millennials, apparently. So
I prefer the term elder millennial.
Oh,
that sounds
geez.
wiser for sure.
I like Gen X. Just,
I am
X
literally
marks the
border.
spot. Don't cross it.
My year is the border.
Technically, I was going to say, I think Hyrum and I are called Zennials with an X. And so we're Zennials and not millennials or Gen X. And so we're literally right in the middle.
Yeah, I came at the very end of
The
the
Oregon
Gen
Trail
X.
generation.
That's right.
No, I was, man.
We're AR points.
The Oregon Trail generation extends into the late 70s and into the mid 80s.
That's
That's
right.
right. That's right.
Computer lab.
It is the
Now
great. It is the great.
Do they even have computer labs anymore?
Don't they?
Yes,
Oh,
sort of.
well, do they?
I mean, because
I think they have their computers in the classroom now.
Every classroom has a computer, so it's basically all of them.
But here they all
you
have.
just don't have to go
Chromebooks.
anywhere.
Like they all have their individual laptops now.
Well, exactly. Like, do they even have a
But
class
like
that's computer lab?
I taught engineering
Okay.
and technology at the junior high,
Oh.
and I had a computer lab because you can't run Blender on a Chromebook. They needed desktops with processors.
I was learning MS-DOS. Excuse me.
Right.
I did too.
Excuse me. I was using.
This is a
Paint.
classic example of research, though.
That's true. That's true.
You've got
If
to
you're writing,
talk we're not that old, but if you want to write something about the late 70s, early 80s, you better talk to a Gen Xer and a Boomer, and maybe even if anyone's still alive of the previous generation, they're getting a little old, but those people all have different perspectives, and that's a great way of finding out more. Because like in the mid 80s, I was programming MS-DOS. I was blue screening my computer. It was a lot of fun, though it was black screening back then. I learned I didn't have a mouse until I think 1990-ish.
Yeah.
And so see, those are things that if my children do not know those things, and so if they ever want to write a book about that time period, they're going to have to talk to me, and I'll answer them in a crotchety old man voice.
Yep.
There is no other way to talk about the past.
Back in my day, my monitor was black and white. And it was.
It was.
And then the green. Then when the screens were green and black.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I remember when video games were text-based. Like, go north.
So
Anyway.
good. I love it.
Oh my goodness. So, yeah. All right. So we're 27 minutes in, which is actually quite short, actually, surprisingly. For us. Because we do like to talk. We like each other and we liked our conversations. But is there anything else that we should add? I think we kind of covered the research point. Is there anybody that is watching now have any questions?
Yeah. Questions or comments?
Probably.
Clearly, we'll listen to anything.
Yes. Sarcastic comments are always great.
Yeah. Oh, by the way. Oh, no, I forgot. Oh, my goodness. I meant to say this earlier in the show. We got fan mail. It's so few and far between that that should, eventually, hopefully that will become a segment of our show. But Mr. Randy Boyum sent us a very nice email. That kind of gave us a few ideas about our YouTube that we should probably go and look into that. And so, Randy, thank you so much for sharing that with us. He is a aspiring author and he's working on his book right now, which eventually I hope once he completes, I would love to have him on the show at some point and maybe talk to him about what he learned during the process, because I think that would be a really cool thing for other people to learn from. So yeah, sorry, meant to do that earlier, but finally got around to it.
That's awesome.
Well, the only thing I would add about research at this point, I like to add hope at the end because it can sound intimidating, but really, you know how much detail you need to write the book. You don't necessarily have to have master's degrees in science to be a science fiction author, but you do have to have curiosity.
Oh, definitely.
And I think if you can just have enough curiosity, but not too much because you don't want to go down the rabbit holes forever. You got to get back to writing. But that's the hope, is you can figure it out. Take notes, do whatever it is makes you learn, and in the end, if you can just do your research and get right back to writing, or do your research before the writing or after, whichever one works for you, you choose what works for you, test it out, and you can do it. Research sounds intimidating, but I mean, we've all done it.
Well, and right. And honestly, depending on what you're writing, some genres and some topics you're going to have to research, or you can write some short stories about things you do know. And honestly, that's kind of like the training wheels method. And that's what I did, is I wrote about things that I really knew, like the towns that I spent time in growing up, different relationships I had with different people growing up. Well, yes. People? Well, hey, That was the
Really?
fictionalized part of it.
Okay,
Maybe,
okay.
maybe, or
I
maybe
missed
there's a
that
ghost right
somehow.
here talking. Maybe I have schizophrenia or multiple, whatever. Maybe I talk to people. I don't know.
He's dissociating.
Yeah, but you can start off with that. About what you know, and then eventually, once you gain the skills that, hey, I can write and I can most importantly, I can finish a story, then you can move on into stories that require a little bit more
Yes.
research, a little bit more whatever it is. So
Okay, I
anyway,
have two things.
two
One of
things.
them in response is it's obvious when you know what you're writing. Like the reader will know when you know what you're writing and not something that you've researched, right? When you are intimately familiar with something, it comes so naturally and you're not trying to, it flows with what you already are writing. So, do start with what you know. And if you need to add research, by all means. Secondly, I had a question from one of our listeners who may be texting me personally because we have that kind of relationship. I just can't get rid of him. But he said, what about attribution? And he's texting me because he's still at work and listening. But he's like, what about attribution? At what point do you need to directly reference some of your research? And if is that something that you are concerned with ever?
Not if you're writing fiction where you are taking what you learned and changing completely. If you are quoting, yes, attribute. But you're not going to quote in most fiction. If you're writing nonfiction, attribution is all over the place. But truly, you can put in the acknowledgments or in somewhere in your fiction book, like I researched this topic here and then give a link to that, or however you reference. I used to do that all the time. But that, I don't think for most fiction, like I don't reference the fact that I learned certain things from certain books, because you're not going to, most of the time in a fiction book, you're not going to take and quote sections. You're not going to take big chunks of stuff. But like if your research is that you watched the movie The Martian and you're making a reference to it, just have your fiction character say, oh yeah, in The Martian, Mark Watney exploded. And then they'll say, well, hopefully we don't. Okay, you move on. You can throw it in subtly if you want.
That's right. And kind of like with the book, Something Wicked Waits, which is about carnivals, in the acknowledgement, I'm like, hey, this wouldn't have been possible without this person. And same thing with, my grave disturbance. Yes, I did work at the Pensacola Police Department, but there was also an officer that I know that I kind of sort of referenced. So another thing, when it comes to research, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, I think, Jen, when you're saying you don't want to bore your readers with knowledge, think of the information that you have as a iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
90% of the knowledge is underneath the surface. You just want to show the 10% of it to allude, and you don't even have to know the 90% of it. That 10% that you show is kind of like the icing on the cake, so to speak, of what's beneath. But anyway.
Yep. Thanks, Stalker, for your question. That was nice.
Yes. Thank you. Good question. All right.
Hey,
so
with that fan mail, if we work hard, maybe we'll get our own real stalkers someday.
Oh my god! I've got one. Y'all can.
And that's why I'm not going to share the email tonight. No. Okay.
Hyram's email address is.
If you can't find me by my name, then you aren't trying very hard.
That's true.
Which, by the way, if you'd like to send us an email, be sure to send it to authorsdilemma@gmail.com. If you have any questions, comments, critiques, we'll be happy to read them and try to answer or ignore. I'm just kidding. We wouldn't ignore, but we'll try to answer whatever questions. Or if you have critiques, like I said, Mr. Boyum, he shared some, not critiques, but he shared some pretty good advice, and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. So, all right. Anything else for this show? I think we're good. Me personally. Going once.
He's done with us.
Yeah.
Got it.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for, again, spending your time with us this evening. If you're listening to us in the future, thank you. I guess that's it. Everyone take care. Have a great week. We'll see you next time. God bless.
Bye.